There is a record, filed under Diplomatic Observation Code V7, in the Valthari Continuance Archive, of a vessel called the Enethsora, which translates, imperfectly, as the patient one who waits for good weather. It was a deep transit vessel, 11 decks, mass of roughly 400,000 metric tons unloaded. It was, by Valthari engineering standards of its era, a masterwork. Every junction calculated, every stress coefficient not merely met, but exceeded. The Valthari do not build to specification. They build to the point where specification becomes an insult to the material. For 61 years, the Enethsora ran the long transit corridors between Valthari core space and the outer cooperative zones. It moved cargo. It moved diplomats. It moved on at least 3 recorded occasions, the relics of Valthari cultural institutions being transferred between holdings. The crew rotated in cycles of 8 years. The vessel itself was considered in Valthari tradition alive, not metaphorically but functionally. A vessel that old, that well-maintained, was understood to have accumulated something. A kind of earned reliability. A personality expressed through the precision of its silence. Then something happened. The formal record says only that the Enethsora experienced a Category 3 structural compromise during a routine transit near the Chara Drift, a debris-rich corridor at the edge of contested space. The record does not say what caused it. The record does not describe what the crew experienced in the 72 minutes between the compromise and the final evacuation. The record simply notes, the crew was recovered. The vessel was designated Lethkoru. All salvage rights were declined. The position was logged and sealed. Oversight envoy Dareth Vel of the Valthari Continuance Mission was posted to a relay station 14 light minutes from the Enethsora's last recorded position. His assignment was administrative. He reviewed trade permits. He processed cooperative agreements. He attended, twice monthly, a cultural exchange forum held over low-latency comm with representatives of 4 species, including the human delegates from the Terran Survey Directorate. He did not expect the Enethsora to become his problem again. He was wrong. Minor Sovets posted Frau Beitol the Ale Trischen. He did the Tarizi Tol the Vitrumpil Tol. Dareth Vel's observation log, entry 1 of what would become a 214-entry record, begins with a single line. The humans have found it. Not, the humans have detected it. Not, a human survey vessel has passed nearby. The humans have found it. The distinction matters in Valthari log notation. Found implies agency. Found implies intent. Found implies that a choice was made. The vessel that made the find was the CSS Tenacious Option, a Terran Reclamation Survey Corps tender, roughly 40 meters long, crewed by 11 people, equipped with the kind of instruments designed to identify commercially salvageable material in debris fields. It was, by any reasonable military or diplomatic assessment, not a warship. It was not an exploration vessel of particular prestige. It was a workship, the kind of vessel that a species sends to places it intends to clean up. It was accompanied by 2 work tugs, Braxton 7 and Braxton 9, each crewed by 4, each equipped with articulated grapple arrays and cargo transfer systems. Dareth Vel watched them approach the Enethsora on passive sensor relay. He noted later that he had expected them to make a single pass, to photograph the exterior, to log the find and transmit a query to the Valthari mission asking about disposition. This was standard cooperative protocol. They did not make a single pass. They made 6. On the 7th approach, the CSS Tenacious Option matched velocity with the drifting Enethsora. It held position for 40 minutes. Then a personnel umbilical extended from the tender's docking collar. Director Senna Marsh boarded the Enethsora with a team of 4. The interior of the Enethsora was not what the team expected. It was not dark. Lieutenant Mavi Dunn's structural assessment log records the entry with careful precision. The airlock cycled. Valthari airlocks are distinctive. Their seals using a pressure balance mechanism that produces a low harmonic tone during equalization, almost musical, and the team stepped into the forward access corridor. Emergency lighting still functioned. Not all of it, but enough. The corridor stretched ahead of them, pale amber, the traditional Valthari interior color spectrum, walls smooth as ground stone, every junction labeled in both Valthari script and the cooperative standard. Dunn notes that the temperature read 4.3 degrees Celsius. Cold, but not the negative vacuum cold of a fully dead ship. Something residual remained. She walked toward the damage zone. The Enethsora's structural compromise, as documented in the Valthari archive, had been classified as occurring in the midship junction, the central connecting structure between the vessel's forward residential sections and the aft drive assembly. Dunn had reviewed the Valthari public record schematics before boarding. She had an expectation of what she would find. The reality stopped her. The midship junction was fractured, not in the linear explosive way that weapon impacts produce, not with the curved, peeling deformation of an internal pressure failure. The structural members, Valthari alloy, a composition renowned for its resistance to both fatigue and brittle fracture, had come apart in a way she did not have a name for. The breaks were at the molecular bonding points, not the material failing. The connections between pieces of the material failing, as if the ship had been told to let go and had obeyed. She photographed everything. She measured everything. She was quiet for a long time. Then she transmitted a single-line update to the tenacious option. "We're going to need Okafor down here." Chief Engineer Okafor Nzube came down 3 hours later, when the team had finished the preliminary sweep and established that the atmosphere, while thin, was breathable in suits. He brought Engineer Second Class Ryan Adisa with him, and 3 additional instrumentation cases. Nzube moved slowly through the midship junction. He said very little for the first hour. Adisa logged readouts and kept pace, and did not push conversation, which colleagues who knew them both noted was unusual. Adisa was not ordinarily quiet. Eventually, Nzube crouched near one of the fractured structural members and held a handheld resonance scanner against the brake surface. He read the output. He scanned it again. He said, "Ryan, come look at this." Adisa crouched beside him. They looked at the scanner output together. "Is that the bonding stress signature?" Adisa asked. "That's what's left of it," Nzube said. "Tell me what you see." Adisa studied it. The signatures relaxed, not overloaded, relaxed, like, he searched for words, like a knot that someone untied. "Yes," Nzube said. Adisa would later explain this in his maintenance log in the plain language that becomes, in archive review, one of the clearest descriptions of what made the Enethsaurus damage so unusual. He wrote, "You know how a bolt fails. A bolt that's been under too much load for too long will fracture. The fracture surface looks a specific way, crystalline, usually, with a pattern that tells you whether it was a fast failure or a slow fatigue failure. Either way, there's evidence of stress. The material fought. That's what overload looks like." What we found on the Enethsaurus was the opposite. The fracture surfaces were smooth, not polished, but smooth the way something looks when it separates without resistance. If a bolt just decided not to be a bolt anymore, if it simply ceased holding, it would look like this. The Valthari alloy is not supposed to be capable of that. The entire design philosophy of Valthari structural engineering is that things hold. They do not merely hold until they fail. They are built with the intention that failure is not a meaningful category. Something made this ship's structural joints decide to let go. That's not physics we have a standard explanation for. That's something else. Director Marsh received Adisa's log and Nzube's preliminary assessment in the Tenacious Options Operations Bay. She read both twice. Then she pulled up the public record Valthari filing on the Enethsaurus designation as Lethkoru. The filing was 18 lines long. Marsh counted them. For a vessel that had served 61 years, crewed hundreds of people, and carried Valthari cultural relics across the transit corridors of cooperative space, 18 lines was not a record. It was an erasure. She sent a query to the Valthari Continuance Mission. Had the Enethsaurus been formally relinquished under the terms of the Unclaimed Salvage Accord, or was the Lethkoru designation a hold that precluded third-party claim? The response came 14 hours later, from a mid-level administrative functionary. It confirmed that Lethkoru designation did not constitute a legal hold under the accord. A Lethkoru vessel was, in Valthari legal philosophy, already gone. Filing a salvage claim on it was, from a Valthari perspective, philosophically equivalent to filing a claim on rain. Marsh filed the claim. Non Rothwell's observation log, entry 9. They have filed. I have notified the High Circle. I am told the response will be managed at the diplomatic level, but I am not optimistic. The humans are not asking for guidance. They are proceeding. The survey team has now conducted a full interior assessment. I have reviewed what sensor data I can access from this distance, and I find myself unable to explain why the Enethsaurus emergency power systems are still functioning after 8 months of abandonment, or why the temperature differential between the forward and aft sections suggests that something aboard is still conducting heat. I have requested a technical consultation from the mission's engineering advisors. They have not responded. The humans have brought in additional equipment, 3 cargo containers transferred from one of their relay depots. I recognize 2 of the container classifications, fabrication materials and structural compound supplies. They are not studying the ship. They are going to rebuild it. The question of what had caused the Enethsaurus structural compromise would not be answered for another 3 months, and when the answer came, it came from an unexpected source. Archivist Sora Tholin, the Rinsect member of the survey team, brought on as cross-species technical consultant, had spent those months in the vessel's data archive. The Rinsect are not engineers by tradition or temperament. They are catalogers, historians, keepers of the precise record. Tholin worked with all 4 of her primary limbs occupied simultaneously, 1 managing the data interface, 2 stabilizing in the low-gravity midship environment, and 1, when she was thinking particularly hard, gesturing at nothing in the way that Rinsect do when processing a complex multi-threaded problem. What she found in the archive was not the cause of the damage, it was the absence of a record that should have been there. Every Valthari vessel of the Enethsaurus class carried a continuous structural monitoring log, a real-time record of stress indicators at every major junction in the ship's frame. This log ran automatically, independently, and was considered tamper-resistant by design. The Enethsaurus structural monitoring log terminated 3 hours and 47 minutes before the structural compromise event. Not failed, not corrupted, terminated. A clean administrative stop command, logged under the vessel's chief maintenance authority. The crew had turned off the structural monitoring before the ship broke. Tholin flagged this with a cross-species cultural note that showed both her training and, in retrospect, considerable courage. The note read, Rinsect archival philosophy requires that significant omissions be treated as content equal to presence. The absence of this record is, by Rinsect standards, a statement. What that statement means within Valthari operational culture I am not qualified to determine. I recommend consultation with the Valthari mission. She transmitted the flag to Senna Marsh. Marsh forwarded it to Dareth Vel. Dareth Vel did not respond immediately. His log records for the first time in the observation journal, a gap of 11 hours with no entry. When entries resumed, they were brief. Entry 47. I have contacted the High Circle regarding Archivist Tholin's finding. I have asked for the crew records of the Enethsaurus final voyage, specifically the Chief Maintenance Officer's authorization logs. I have been told this information is not available for cooperative review. I have been told the matter is closed. Entry 48. I am applying for access through the Heritage Accountability Framework. This is a slow process. I am told it may take many months. Entry 49. The humans are welding. The Coalition convened an emergency session of the Cooperative Standards Body 11 days after the salvage claim was formally accepted. The session was attended by representatives of 7 species. 4 of them, the Rinsect, the Govol Collective, the Teth Communion, and the Human Terran Survey Directorate, had formal membership in the accord that governed salvage rights. The other 3 attended as observing parties. The Govol Collective's representative, a tall, spindly individual named Assessor Dren, opened with what was described in the session transcript as a procedurally noted concern. The concern was that a human salvage claim on a Valthari vessel, regardless of Lethkoru classification, set a precedent with destabilizing implications for the broader cultural property understanding among cooperative species. The Teth Communion's representative expanded on this. The Enethsaura, she noted, was not merely a ship. It had carried Valthari cultural relics. It was, in some traditions, considered to be a relic itself by virtue of its age and service. The designation Lethkoru was a mourning practice, not a legal release. The human representative, a directorate legal officer named Councillor Prisa Vom, listened to both presentations. She then asked 3 questions, each answered by the session record itself. Had the Valthari filed a cultural designation hold under Section 7 of the Salvage Accord? No. Had the Valthari registered a retrieval intent within the Accord's standard 180-day window? No. Had any party filed a competing claim before the Terran Survey Directorate's filing? No. She did not argue that the human action was culturally sensitive. She did not apologize. She acknowledged, with what the session transcript records as measured acknowledgement, that the human team was aware of the significance of the vessel to Valthari heritage, and that the Reclamation Survey Corps intended to treat the ship with appropriate care. Then she said something that the session transcript records verbatim, because no one who heard it was certain how to paraphrase it. Director Marsh's team has identified that this vessel is not beyond repair. We disagree with its designation. We are choosing to proceed on that disagreement. There was a pause in the session record of approximately 23 seconds. Then the Govol assessor asked what the humans intended to do with the Enethsaura once it was repaired. Vom said, "That has not been decided. First, it will be made to work." 6 months is not a long time by any standard used to measure the life of a deep transit vessel. In 6 months the Enethsaura changed. The midship junction was the first and most critical restoration target. Nunzube's engineering team, which expanded over the 6 months as the scope of the project became clearer, eventually comprising 31 humans and 3 Rinsect technical associates, worked through the fractured structural members with a methodology that Dareth Vel watched on sensor relay and described, in his log, as systematic violence against the concept of acceptable loss. Every fractured member was assessed. Where the original Valthari alloy remained sound beyond the break, it was retained. Where sound material began at a clean test boundary,
It was spliced with a compound the humans called a bridging alloy, a material Nzube's team formulated specifically for this project, designed to bond with Valthari alloy on one side and behave as a primary structural element on the other. The splice points were not hidden. They were documented, logged, and visually marked with a thin line of high-contrast sealant that would be permanently visible in any interior inspection. Dareth Vel noted this in Entry 71. The humans are not attempting to restore the ship to its original appearance. They are making it clear permanently where the original material ends and their work begins. I have asked Engineer Nzube, through a relay inquiry, why this is the approach. He replied, and I am quoting directly, because the ship has a history. We're adding to it, not erasing it. The drive assembly was a different problem entirely. The Enethsora's core drive was a 5th-generation Valthari phase lattice motivator, a design so refined that, in the cooperative engineering community, it was considered the standard against which all transit-class drives were measured. Valthari phase lattice motivators did not fail casually. They were over-engineered to a degree that some engineers from other species described as philosophical rather than practical. The drive had not been destroyed in the structural compromise event. The drive had been switched off.
Nzube found the shutdown sequence in the engineering subsystem logs, one of the few logs that had not been cleared before the crew evacuated. The drive had been shut down in an ordered, deliberate sequence, every system brought offline in the correct order, safety locks engaged, power bleed confirmed. It was the shutdown sequence of a crew that intended to come back, a crew that had prepared the ship for waiting. Lieutenant Dunn, reviewing this alongside Nzube, said quietly, "They thought they were coming back." Nzube said yes. Dunn said, "And then they weren't allowed to." Nzube didn't answer that. He wrote it down instead, in the project log under observation notes. It sat there in the record, neither confirmed nor denied, waiting for Dareth Vel's heritage accountability request to work its way through the Valthari administrative system. Reiner Disa had a theory about the drive. He held it for 6 weeks before bringing it to Nzube, because it required a redesign of the power architecture so fundamental that he suspected Nzube would object on grounds of scope. He was wrong about that. Nzube read the proposal, set it down, read it again, and said, "Show me the load modeling." The problem with restarting a phase lattice motivator that had been dormant for 8 months in a structurally compromised vessel was not the drive itself. The drive was intact. The problem was the power feed architecture, the network of conduits and regulators that connected the drive to the ship's power generation systems. Valthari power architecture was elegant, efficient, and deeply unforgiving of variation. The power flow through a phase lattice motivator had to be precisely shaped, the right distribution, the right timing, the right pressure at every node in the feed network. Deviation produced harmonic instability. Harmonic instability in a phase lattice motivator produced outcomes that the Valthari engineering tradition classified simply as unacceptable and declined to describe further. The midship junction damage had interrupted 3 major power feed conduits. Restoring them to Valthari specification required materials and fabrication tolerances that the tenacious options supply chain could approximate but not guarantee. Adisa's proposal was not to restore the original architecture, it was to replace it with something different. The proposal described a power distribution system based on a principle Adisa called redundant asymmetric feeding. Essentially, instead of a single precisely shaped flow through the lattice, the drive would receive power through 7 smaller feeds, each slightly different in character. Each monitored continuously and adjusted in real time by a control system that treated variation not as a flaw to eliminate, but as data to manage. The drive would not receive perfect power, it would receive responsive power. Nzube's load modeling confirmed that a phase lattice motivator operating on asymmetric feed should in theory work. It would produce slightly less peak efficiency than a correctly fed lattice. It would, however, tolerate disruption in ways the original architecture could not. If one feed line was damaged, the other 6 compensated. If the ship's structural dynamics shifted under stress, the control system adapted rather than catastrophically corrected. "It won't run the way it was supposed to run," Adisa said. "It'll run," Nzube replied. "And it won't stop running just because something goes wrong." There was a silence between them that the log does not capture, but that both would reference in later interviews as the moment when the project changed from restoration to something else. Nzube approved the proposal. Dareth Vel's heritage accountability request was granted in the 4th month of the rebuild, which he noted in his log was likely not coincidental, the Valthari administrative timeline moving, perhaps deliberately, fast enough that he would receive the information after the humans had already committed to a course of action, and too late for the revelation to change anything. What the records showed, the Enethsora had been on its final contracted transit when the structural compromise occurred. The structural monitoring had been disabled, not to hide the event, but because the chief maintenance officer had conducted a full inspection 2 days prior and filed a report that the ship was experiencing unexplained micro-stress anomalies at the midship junction. The report recommended a full structural review at the next port of call. The report recommended in a technical annex that used notably careful language that if the anomalies continued or worsened, the ship should be considered for early retirement assessment. The captain had filed the report up the Valthari operational chain. The chain had, in a decision attributed to a logistics coordinator 3 levels removed from the vessel, determined that the transit should be completed before the review was scheduled. The Eneth Sora was needed on the route. The anomalies were assessed as non-critical. The structural monitoring was disabled during the transit not to hide the data, but because the chief maintenance officer, who believed the anomalies were serious, did not want a continuous record of them reaching the operational chain and being dismissed again. She intended to collect raw data herself, with a manual logging system, and build an incontrovertible case. She was going to bring the numbers to the Valthari Engineering Continuance Board herself and force the review. She never had the chance. The compromise happened 9 hours into the transit. The crew evacuated. Everyone survived. Then the logistics chain filed for Leth Koru designation, not because the ship was unsavable, because reviewing how the damage happened and why the maintenance report had been set aside would require the Valthari operational system to confront an error in its own judgment. The ship was designated unrepairable because the people responsible for it not being repaired needed it to be unrepairable. Darathvel sat with this information for a long time. Then he wrote entry 1112. I understand now why the humans filed the claim. I am not certain they know what they found. I am not certain I should tell them. I am not certain it would change anything if I did. They are already halfway through building something that proves the point better than I could explain it. The Eneth Sora's first ignition test was conducted on a clear, cold morning in the operational sense of those words. A moment of no traffic, no other vessels within the debris field, a favorable communication window to the relay station. Nazubi coordinated from the engineering bay. Adisa monitored the power feed system. Nun watched structural sensors, and Senamash stood at the center of the operations bridge and did not move. The start sequence took 11 minutes. Phase lattice motivators do not ignite, they awaken. They move from stillness through a series of progressive states, each one building on the last, each requiring confirmation before the next begins. Nazubi walked the sequence step by step, calling each state aloud, receiving confirmation from his team, proceeding. At step 7, the first state in which the drive would draw substantial power from the feed network, the asymmetric feed architecture engaged for the first time under real load. The control system read the 7 feed lines. It observed the variation between them. It compensated. It continued compensating, adjusting in real time 1,000 small corrections per second. It was not the elegant, pure power flow a Valthari drive had always received. It was something more like water finding its way through an unfamiliar riverbed, not forced into a single channel, but permitted to discover which paths were open. The drive reached operational state. The Eneth Sora's main engines came online. The sound, transmitted through the hull, felt rather than heard at this distance, was not the sound Darathvel had heard on recordings of Valathari ships. It was lower, slightly rougher, more present, somehow. He could not articulate, in engineering terms, why a running engine would feel more present. But it did. The drive held for 40 minutes of test operation. Then, at 23 minutes into the test, something happened that was not in Nzube's plan. The phase lattice motivator, operating on its new asymmetric power architecture, producing its responsive adaptive power flow, moved into a performance envelope that the original Valthari design had not reached. Not a malfunction, not a failure, an extension. The efficiency curve, which should have peaked below Valthari standard due to the asymmetric feed's inherent variation, instead extended past it. The control system's continuous adaptation was not merely compensating for the variation, it was exploiting it. The 7 feeds, slightly different from each other, slightly out of phase, were creating a drive condition more complex and more powerful than any single perfectly shaped feed could produce. Adisa stared at his readout. He said nothing for a long moment. Then he said very quietly, Okafor, are you seeing this? Nanzubi looked at his screen. He said yes. Is that? Yes. The Valthari never. No, Nanzubi said. They didn't. Darathvel's transmission to the Valthari High Circle, entry 157 of his observation log, recorded in its entirety. I am filing this transmission under Heritage Accountability Protocol, which means it will be reviewed by the full circle rather than processed administratively. I am filing it under that protocol deliberately, because I want it to be read rather than managed. The Eneth Sora is operational. The humans have restored it. I should be precise. The humans have done something more than restore it. They have rebuilt it into a working vessel that performs beyond the original design parameters. I have attached the engineering test data for your review. The drive performance figures are accurate. I have verified them through 3 independent measurement systems. I want to be clear about what this means. The Velthari engineering tradition holds that the Nth Sora was beyond repair, that a phase lattice motivator in a fractured vessel, fed by compromised power architecture, could not be safely returned to function, that the designation Leth Koru, a thing beyond saving, surrendered to silence, was technically accurate. The humans read the same technical situation and reached a different conclusion, not because they had better materials, not because they had superior engineering science. They reached a different conclusion because they were willing to accept that the ship would not return to what it had been. They designed a new architecture for it. They built to what the ship could become, not what it had been. I am not filing this transmission to celebrate the humans. I am filing it because of what the maintenance archive revealed, and because the High Circle needs to understand that the reason the Nth Sora was designated Leth Koru is now visible to a human salvage team, a Rinsect archivist, and through this transmission, to anyone who requests access to the Heritage Accountability File. The ship was not beyond saving. The ship was designated beyond saving, because saving it would have required admitting that the operational chain made an error, that a maintenance officer's warning was dismissed, that the dismissal caused structural damage that could have been prevented. The humans did not know this when they filed the claim. They found it in the archive, as competent engineers find things, by reading the record carefully, by noting what was absent, and by asking why. The Rinsect archivist flagged the monitoring log termination. The humans followed the thread. By the time the Heritage Accountability File gave me the full picture, they were already halfway through building the proof that the designation was wrong. The Nth Sora is running. It is running better than it ran before, and the record of why it was abandoned, the maintenance report, the dismissal, the Leth Koru designation, is now attached to every document in this file. I do not know what the High Circle will do with this information. I do not know what the humans will do with the ship. I know that when Director Marsh was asked, at the conclusion of the ignition test, what the Nth Sora should be called now, whether it would receive a new name, a new designation, a new identity, she was quiet for a moment and then she said, "The ship already has a name. We're not changing it. The patient one who waits for good weather. The humans are keeping the name. I find I have nothing further to add." The aftermath moved through the cooperative species community, in the way that significant events move, slowly at first, then with a speed that surprised everyone who had been watching closely from the beginning. The Velthari High Circle's formal response to Dareth Vel's transmission was released 19 days after receipt. It acknowledged the Heritage Accountability filing. It acknowledged the engineering test data. It opened an internal review of the maintenance archive and the events leading to the Nth Sora's Leth Koru designation. The review was to be conducted by an independent Velthari body. The outcome would be reported to the Continuance Archive. This was, in diplomatic terms, a significant concession. The Velthari do not typically open internal reviews in response to external-facing incidents. That this one moved at all, let alone within 19 days of the transmission, was noted by every diplomatic observer in the cooperative community. The Goval assessor, who had raised procedural concerns at the standards body session, submitted a revised position paper 3 weeks later. The paper did not retract the concerns. It noted that the Nth Sora precedent required re-examination of the Salvage Accord's cultural property provisions, and recommended that a working group be established to review what constituted a legitimate Leth Koru equivalent designation across species traditions versus what constituted a declaration made for reasons unrelated to a vessel's technical status. The Teth Communion representative, in a private communication that became part of the public record when she included it in her own mission report, wrote, "The humans did not dispute the designation. They rejected the premise that the designation was a final word. There is a difference, and we should consider carefully what it means that they understood this difference and acted on it. The Nth Sora itself remained in the hands of the Terran Reclamation Survey Corps under the accepted salvage claim. Its disposition, what role it would serve, under whose flag it would operate, was formally undecided for another 4 months. Then the Velthari mission formally requested that the ship be returned to Velthari registry. The request was received, reviewed, and declined. Politely, thoroughly, with documentation referencing the accepted salvage claim, the technical investment, and the now public record of why the Lethkoru designation had been applied in the first place. The request was not renewed. The Eneth Sora was assigned to the Terran Cooperative Research and Assessment Fleet, under a joint charter that gave it a mixed human and Rinsect crew, with Dareth Vel himself assigned as the cooperative observer, a position he requested, and that his mission approved after a delay that suggested considerable internal debate. He accepted the posting without public comment. His first log entry from aboard the Eneth Sora reads, "The drive sounds different than I expected. I asked engineer Adisa about it. He said that the power architecture creates a harmonic byproduct at operational load. He said it was initially considered a cosmetic flaw, but that the crew had come to regard it as a feature. I asked him how a sound became a feature. He said it tells you the ship is working. You don't have to check the instruments, you can hear it. I sat with that for a while, I think I understand." What changed in the years after the Eneth Sora's restoration was not dramatic. There was no fleet repositioning, no military demonstration, no formal declaration from the Terran Survey Directorate about what the incident meant. The Cooperative Standards Body revised its salvage accord provisions. The revision added language requiring that any vessel designated as culturally unrepairable under a mourning tradition must, if a third party files a competing technical assessment, undergo a joint review before the designation prevented salvage. The provision was called, in the official text, the Technical Objection Clause. It was referred to informally, in every diplomatic and engineering community that had followed the Eneth Sora case, as the Marsh Clause. The Valthari engineering tradition underwent a less formal but more profound shift. The internal review opened by the High Circle found what Dareth Vel's transmission had implied it would find. The maintenance officer's warning had been correctly filed, correctly escalated, and correctly dismissed by a logistics coordinator, making a decision based on schedule pressure rather than technical judgment. The coordinator was reassigned. The maintenance officer, long since retired, living in a Valthari coastal city, unaware that her ship had been restored and renamed, and was now running joint survey missions, received a formal acknowledgement from the High Circle that her assessment had been correct. She reportedly read the acknowledgement 3 times, set it down, and said nothing for a long while. The Valthari Engineering Continuance Board issued new standards for maintenance report handling. One of the standards specified that any maintenance officer's report recommending early retirement assessment for a vessel must be reviewed by a body independent of the operational logistics chain. The new standard was called, in internal Valthari documents, the Sora Protocol, named not for the ship's full designation but for the single word from it that translates as one who waits. Other species noticed. Other engineering traditions noted. The change was not announced publicly. It appeared in Valthari technical documentation and was discussed in cooperative engineering forums. The Rinsect archival community published an analysis of the full Eneth Sora case history, from the original maintenance filing to the final restored drive test, as a teaching document on the relationship between institutional silence and engineering failure. The document was widely distributed. It was used in training programs for engineers from at least 4 cooperative species within 3 years of publication. The humans did not publish anything about the incident. They filed their technical reports, updated their salvage records, and assigned the Eneth Sora to active duty. The only public statement attributable to the Reclamation Survey Corps regarding the entire affair was a single line in the Corps' annual report, under the heading of Notable Restorations. CSS Eneth Sora, formerly Valthari Deep Transit Vessel, returned to operational status following structural rebuild, now serving joint cooperative research operations. No elaboration. No emphasis. Director Marsh asked in an interview about the case 2 years after the ignition test, said, "The ship was fixable. We fixed it. The rest is the record." Then she moved on to the next question. Chief Engineer Okafor Nzube retired from active field assignment 18 months after the Eneth Sora project, moving to an advisory position at the Reclamation Survey Corps' Engineering Training Division. He had by most accounts been ready to retire for some time, but had held on until the Eneth Sora was confirmed stable at 6 months of active operation. His final project log entry was written the evening before he handed the vessel over to the joint charter crew. He wrote it in the engineering bay where he had spent most of his time during the rebuild. The log was not formally submitted anywhere. It was a personal record, later found in the Corps' archived files, and included with his permission in the Rinsect archival document on the case. It read, "There's a kind of engineering philosophy that treats anything broken as having a known endpoint. The question is only how quickly the endpoint arrives. I spent a long time not believing that was right, and I've spent this project proving it's not. The Eneth Sora was broken. It's still broken in some sense. The marks are there. You can see where the original material ends and our work begins. You can hear, if you listen to the drive long enough, that the power architecture is doing something the original
original designers didn't plan. The ship isn't what it was. It'll never be what it was. What it is running. What it is better at surviving damage than it was when it was new, not despite the rebuild, but because of it. The ship carries its history now, not as a wound, but as a design feature. I think about the maintenance officer who filed the report that nobody listened to. I think about the 61 years of crew rotations, all the people who learned this ship's particular sounds and silences, who knew which corridor felt different at full thrust and which junction hummed at a specific engine load. All of that knowledge, sitting in the ship's record, waiting. We didn't restore a ship, we kept a conversation going. I hope whoever takes her next listens to her carefully. She has things to say. Dareth Vel served 3 years aboard the Eneth Sora before returning to the Valthari mission in a senior advisory capacity. He wrote extensively about his time on the ship. His work was read widely in diplomatic circles and became a standard reference in cooperative species studies programs. But the passage most often quoted, most often extracted and repeated, most often cited in debates about what made the Eneth Sora case significant, was not from his formal diplomatic analysis. It was from his personal observation log, entry 189, written late in his second year aboard the ship, after a difficult transit through a debris corridor where the Eneth Sora's structural sensors had registered significant but manageable stress in the rebuilt midship junction. The junction held. I watched the readouts through the worst of the debris impact sequence, and I watched the structural numbers move, not into the failure zone, but toward it, and then back. The redundant systems compensated. The new architecture did what Nzube and Adisa designed it to do. It did not resist the stress, it distributed it, adapted to it, moved with it rather than against it. I thought about the original chief maintenance officer, whose name I now know. I thought about what she would say if she could see this readout. I think she would not be surprised. I think she knew the ship was more than anyone was willing to admit. She filed the report, she tried to protect it, she was not listened to, and the ship broke, and then it was declared finished. But the ship was not finished. It turns out the ship was not even close to finished. That is, I think, the thing the humans understood that we did not. Not that the ship could be repaired. We knew that in the abstract. We simply did not believe it was worth the effort of discovering how. The humans believed it was worth the effort of discovering how. The difference between those two positions is not engineering. It is something that the Valthari tradition calls, in our oldest philosophical texts, something that has been translated many ways, but which I have come to think is best rendered simply as willingness. They were willing to find out. That is all it was. That is everything it was. The Eneth Sora is still running. It made 63 transit runs in its first year under joint charter. It has since logged over 400 missions. Its mixed crew has rotated 6 times. The humans who first boarded it, Marsh, Nzube, Adisa, Dunn, Thalin, are scattered now, to other postings, other projects, other vessels in the long ongoing work of the cooperative survey operations. But the ship remembers them, in the way that ships remember the people who made them, in the splice marks, visible in any interior inspection, where the original material ends, and the bridging work begins. In the drive, which still runs with that slight distinctive harmonic that Adisa described as a feature, and that every crew since has come to regard as the ship's voice. In the power architecture, 7 feeds instead of 1, continuously adapting, continuously finding its own path through variation. The designation Lethkor O was formally removed from the Eneth Sora's Valthari record in a ceremony that Dareth Vel attended, and about which he wrote only. The record is corrected. The ship was never gone. The name was not changed. It has never been changed. The patient one who waits for good weather is still waiting for good weather, in the way of all things built to last, not by assuming the weather will be good, but by being prepared to survive it when it isn't. Somewhere, in a coastal city, a retired Valthari maintenance officer keeps a copy of the Rinsect archival document on the case. She has read it several times. She has never spoken publicly about it. Her maintenance report is filed in the Eneth Sora's current operational archive, where every crew member who comes aboard can read it. The original document, her signature, the dismissal notation from the logistics coordinator, and appended at the end by the Heritage Accountability filing, a single line from the Valthari Engineering Continuance Board. Assessment confirmed. Recommendation was correct. The ship runs. Furu thoughts it. If something about the Eneth Sora case stayed with you, if you found yourself wondering not just about this ship, but about all the things that have been designated beyond saving before anyone willing to check showed up, consider staying with us. There's more here worth looking at. And if you want to know what happens when a human crew boards a vessel they were explicitly warned not to approach, a vessel that 3 species have quarantined, not because it's damaged, but because of what it did to the last people who tried to study it, that record is already waiting. The answer is not what anyone expected.